Welcome to Readings in English, your go-to channel for learning English through captivating stories. We all know that mastering a new language, especially English, can be challenging. From understanding tricky grammar rules to pronouncing words that sound nothing like they're written, the road to fluency is full of obstacles, but don't worry. Here on this channel, we transform those challenges into fun, engaging lessons by sharing incredible stories that are designed to teach you English in a natural and enjoyable way. Today, we bring you a heartwarming and humorous story about a group of friends who form a book club to improve their English together. Each week, they dive into a new story and practice speaking and discussing in English. Along the way, they encounter funny moments with pronunciation and grammar, but they always have each other's backs. This book club becomes more than just a study group. It turns into a place of laughter, learning, and personal growth for everyone involved. Now, let's jump into today's story. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at the pile of English textbooks that surrounded her. The weight of her frustration pressed down on her as she struggled to comprehend even the simplest of words. Pronunciations escaped her, slipping through her mind like sand between her fingers. She felt isolated in her small town, where opportunities to practice English were scarce. Each failed attempt to master the language only deepened her insecurities. Her job prospects were limited, and social interactions felt stilted, all because of this one barrier she couldn't seem to break through. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the room as Sarah glanced at her phone. She remembered something a coworker had mentioned in passing about forming a reading club to help improve their English. It sounded like a good idea at the time, but now, in the midst of her exhaustion, it felt like a distant possibility. Could a reading club really help? Could it ease the constant pressure she felt? With a deep breath, she unlocked her phone and opened her messaging app, her fingers hovering over the screen as doubt gnawed at her. But the alternative was worse: continuing on this lonely path, struggling in isolation. She hesitated for a moment longer before typing out a quick message to her friends David, Maria, and Ben. She proposed the idea of forming a reading club, explaining that they could meet weekly to practice their English by reading together. Her thumb hovered over the send button, heart pounding. What if they thought it was a silly idea? What if no one wanted to join her? With a final push of determination, she pressed send. To her surprise, the responses came quickly. David was enthusiastic, saying he had been meaning to work on his English for months, but had never gotten around to it. Maria, too, was eager, mentioning how learning English was something she had been putting off for years. Even Ben, who was often too busy with work, responded positively, saying he could use the help and the company. The unexpected support lifted Sarah's spirits, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. A week later, they gathered in Sarah's small living room for their first meeting. The group sat in a circle, each holding a copy of a simple children's book. They figured It would be an easy way to ease into reading in English. But as they took turns reading aloud, the atmosphere quickly shifted. Pronunciations were butchered, sentences were mangled, and grammar rules seemed to dissolve into thin air. Each person stumbled through the text, their faces a mixture of concentration and embarrassment. But instead of frustration, the room soon filled with laughter. David mispronounced a word so badly that it turned into something completely unrelated, and Ben, in his usual deadpan manner, couldn't help but point out the absurdity of their collective struggle. Maria couldn't stop mixing up her verb tenses, leading to a string of sentences that made absolutely no sense. What started as a nerve-wracking experience morphed into a comedy of errors, and for the first time since starting this journey, Sarah found herself genuinely laughing at her mistakes. As the weeks went by, the reading club became a regular fixture in their lives. Each member faced their own unique challenges with the language. David, with his thick accent, found pronunciation particularly difficult. He often grew frustrated when others corrected him, feeling as though his accent was a barrier he couldn't overcome. Maria constantly juggled her tenses, switching between past, present, and future with reckless abandon. And Ben, who was generally quiet, struggled with understanding idiomatic expressions, which often left him feeling out of place in conversations. Despite these challenges, the group grew more determined. They began to actively help one another, offering gentle corrections and sharing tips they had picked up along the way. The atmosphere was one of encouragement and support, where mistakes were no longer something to be feared, but embraced as part of the learning process. The club became more than just a space to practice English. It became a place where they could be vulnerable without judgment, where their shared difficulties bonded them together. One particular evening, Sarah faced her first real breakthrough. She was reading a particularly difficult passage from a short story they had chosen, one that was filled with unfamiliar words and complex sentence structures. Normally, she would have avoided speaking up, terrified of embarrassing herself in front of her friends. But that night, something inside her shifted. She took a deep breath, her heart racing, and began to read aloud. Her voice wavered at first, but as she continued, her friends encouraged her, their smiles and supportive nods giving her the strength to push through. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but the fact that she had faced her fear head-on and succeeded, even in a small way, was enough. Her friends congratulated her, celebrating the victory as if it were their own, and in many ways it was. The club wasn't just about individual growth, it was about growing together, supporting one another through the ups and downs of language, learning, and life. As the group gathered their things to leave that evening, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in a long time. The reading club had become her sanctuary, a place where she could fail without fear and improve without pressure. More than that, it had become a space where she could be herself, where her worth wasn't tied to how well she spoke English, but to the connections she had made with the people around her. In the quiet moments after everyone left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, reflecting on how much had changed since that first meeting. Her English was still far from perfect, but that didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was the growth she felt inside, the confidence that was slowly building, the friendships that were deepening, and the realization that this journey wasn't just about learning a language. It was about learning to believe in herself, and with that realization came an excitement for the future. The reading club was just beginning, and she knew that there were more challenges ahead, both in language and in life. But for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt ready to face them. She was no longer walking this path alone. As the weeks progressed, the reading club faced new challenges. The initial excitement that had fueled their meetings began to wane as each member grappled with the increasing demands of life. Sarah, especially, felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Her job was becoming more demanding, with longer hours and tighter deadlines. As much as she loved the reading club and the progress they had made, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. She was torn between her desire to improve her English and the reality of her growing workload. The reading club had become a safe haven for Sarah, but now it felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. The guilt gnawed at her every time she considered skipping a meeting, but the exhaustion from work left her drained. She struggled to balance the two, often finding herself daydreaming at her desk about the books they were reading, only to snap back to reality as emails piled up in her inbox. The stress was mounting, and she wasn't the only one feeling it. David had missed the last two meetings, citing work obligations and personal commitments. Maria, always cheerful and optimistic, confessed that her family was pressuring her to focus on more practical pursuits. She loved the reading club, but couldn't deny that the time spent there was becoming harder to justify. Ben, though still attending regularly, seemed distant, his mind often wandering during their discussions. It was clear that the group was struggling to stay committed. One evening, as they gathered for their usual session, the mood in the room was noticeably different. The usual light-hearted banter was replaced with a heavy silence. Sarah could feel the tension in the air, and it wasn't long before someone spoke up. David, visibly tired, broke the quiet. He expressed his doubts about continuing with the club, admitting that his work schedule had become too demanding, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up with their weekly meetings. His words hung in the air, echoing the unspoken thoughts of the others. Maria nodded in agreement, her usual bright smile fading. She explained how her family had been questioning the time she spent at the club, urging her to focus on finding a better job. Ben, who had been quiet for most of the evening, finally chimed in, revealing that he had recently faced rejection in a job interview due to his lack of fluency in English. The setback had shaken his confidence, and though he appreciated the club, he wasn't sure if it was enough to help him in the real world. Sarah listened to her friends, her heart heavy with a mixture of empathy and guilt. She had been feeling the same doubts, but hadn't wanted to admit it. The reading club had become more than just a place to practice English. It had become a place of refuge, a space where they could escape the pressures of everyday life. But now it seemed like those pressures were catching up with them. As the group sat in silence, Sarah realized that this was a pivotal moment. They could either let the club fall apart, succumbing to the challenges of life, or they could push through and find a way to make it work. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking. "I know things have been tough," she began, her voice steady but soft. "We all have our own struggles, and I get it, life is demanding. But this club isn't just about learning English. It's about us, about supporting each other through the ups and downs. I don't want to give up on that. I don't want to give up on us." Her words seemed to resonate with the group. David leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought, while Maria wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Ben looked at Sarah, his usual stoic expression softening. For a moment, the weight of their individual struggles lifted as they were reminded of why they had started this journey in the first place. Sarah continued, her confidence growing. "Maybe we need to make some changes. We don't have to meet every week if that's too much. We can be more flexible, make it work around our lives. But I don't want us to lose what we've built here. I think it's worth fighting for." The room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of doubt or exhaustion, it was the silence of contemplation, of possibilities. Slowly, one by one, they began to nod. David, though still tired, agreed that they could find a way to make the club fit into their lives without it becoming a burden. Maria, ever the optimist, suggested that they could even alternate hosts or have virtual meetings if time was tight. Ben, though still dealing with his own insecurities, agreed that the club had become a source of support that he didn't want to lose. With the decision made to continue, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They left that evening with lighter hearts, knowing that the reading club would evolve just as they had. The challenges weren't over. There would still be moments of doubt and difficulty, but now they were committed to seeing it through together. In the days that followed, Sarah found herself feeling more hopeful. The weight of her job hadn't lessened, but her perspective had shifted. She began to see the reading club not as an obligation, but as a necessary reprieve from the stresses of life. It was a reminder that growth, whether in language or in life, didn't happen in isolation. It happened through connection, through the support of those who shared the journey. As the next meeting approached, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation. They had decided to tackle a more complex book this time, something that would challenge them in new ways. It was a daunting prospect, but one that excited her. The club was no longer just a means to an end. It had become a vital part of her life, and she was ready to face whatever came next. When they gathered again, there was a noticeable change in the atmosphere. The tension from the previous weeks had dissipated, replaced with a quiet determination. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to take it on, one page at a time. As they opened their books and began to read, the familiar sense of camaraderie returned, stronger than ever before. For Sarah, this was more than just a reading club, it was a lifeline. And with each passing week, as their language skills improved, so did their understanding of one another. The struggles they faced in life mirrored the struggles they faced in the text, but now they knew they didn't have to face them alone. As the reading club entered its third month, personal struggles began to emerge among the members. It was no longer just about learning English. The language lessons were intertwined with the emotional battles each member was fighting. The club had become a space where their insecurities, fears, and hidden doubts slowly came to the surface. David, who had always been the most confident in the group, started to show cracks in his exterior. His strong accent, which he had once been proud of, now felt like a burden. He had been passed over for a promotion at work, with the unspoken reason being his difficulty in communicating fluently in English. One evening, as they gathered around the familiar circle in Sarah's living room, David finally opened up about his frustrations. His voice, usually filled with humor, was laced with vulnerability as he confessed that he had been avoiding speaking English outside of the club. He felt as though people judged him for his accent, as if it made him less competent or intelligent. The group listened intently, offering their quiet support. Sarah could sense how much it took for him to admit this. It was a reminder that, no matter how confident someone appeared, everyone had their struggles. Maria, ever the empathetic one, was the first to respond. She shared her own experience, admitting that she too felt pressured by her family. Her relatives, especially her parents, didn't understand why she spent so much time in the reading club. They saw it as a hobby, something that was taking her focus away from finding a more secure job or settling down. Every time she mentioned the club at home, it was met with disapproving looks or dismissive comments. It had started to wear her down, making her doubt whether she should continue with the group. Ben, who had been quieter than usual that evening, sighed deeply before speaking. He revealed that he had recently faced a major setback in his career. He had been turned down for a job he desperately wanted, and the reason given was his lack of fluency in English. The rejection had hit him harder than he cared to admit. For weeks, he had been questioning whether all the effort he was putting into learning the language was worth it. The rejection made him feel as though no matter how hard he tried, he would always fall short. As the group shared their struggles, a somber mood settled over the room. The reading club, which had once been a source of joy and progress, now felt heavy with the weight of their collective insecurities. Sarah, who had been listening quietly, realized that this was a turning point for the group. They could either let their struggles pull them apart, or they could face them together, finding strength in one another. Taking a deep breath, Sarah spoke. She thanked everyone for being so open and vulnerable, acknowledging how hard it was to share these personal battles. She admitted that she, too, had been feeling overwhelmed. The pressure of improving her English for her job had started to take a toll on her mental health. She often found herself questioning whether she was good enough, whether she would ever be able to speak fluently without second-guessing every word that came out of her mouth. But then Sarah reminded them of something important. She reminded them why they had started the reading club in the first place. It wasn't just about becoming fluent in English. It was about creating a space where they could support each other, where they could make mistakes and still feel valued. The club was never meant to be about perfection, it was about progress. No matter how slow or imperfect that progress might be, her words seemed to resonate with the group. David, who had been slouched in his chair, sat up a little straighter. Maria nodded, her eyes reflecting a renewed sense of determination. Even Ben, who had been staring at the floor, looked up with a faint smile. They weren't alone in their struggles, and that realization seemed to lift some of the weight that had been pressing down on them. The mood shifted as they decided to focus on what they could control. They made a pact to keep showing up, even on the days when they felt like giving up. They would continue to read together, to laugh at their mistakes, and to support each other, not just in language learning, but in life. The reading club had become more than a place to practice English. It had become a lifeline, a source of strength that each of them needed. That evening, they chose a new book to read, something more challenging, something that would push them to grow not only in their language skills, but in their understanding of themselves and the world. As they opened the book and began to read aloud, there was a sense of renewal in the air. The words they stumbled over didn't feel as daunting. The laughter that filled the room didn't feel forced. They were in this together, and that made all the difference. Over the next few weeks, the group faced more personal challenges, that they faced them with a newfound sense of resilience. David began to embrace his accent, realizing that it was part of who he was and didn't define his ability to communicate. Maria started standing up for her family, explaining how much the reading club meant to her and how it was helping her grow, both as a person and as a professional. Ben, though still struggling with the aftermath of his job rejection, began to see the club as a place where he could rebuild his confidence, one word at a time. For Sarah, the club had become her anchor. It was the one place where she didn't have to prove herself, where she could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. It reminded her that learning a language, much like life, was a journey filled with setbacks and breakthroughs, but it was the people you shared that journey with who made it worthwhile. As the third chapter of their reading club came to a close, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. The challenges they had faced individually had brought them closer together as a group. Their personal struggles had transformed into shared experiences, making their bond even stronger. They weren't just learning English anymore, they were learning how to navigate life's difficulties with grace and resilience. The reading club, once just a small idea to improve their language skills, had become a place of healing, growth, and support. And as they closed their books for the evening, each of them left with a little more hope in their hearts, knowing that they would continue to face whatever came next together. As the group continued to meet week after week, they decided to challenge themselves with more complex literature. The easy stories they had started with had been helpful in building their confidence, but now they were eager for something deeper, something that would stretch both their language skills and their understanding of the world. They selected a novel with more advanced vocabulary and intricate themes, a book that dealt with human emotions, relationships, and personal growth. The decision to tackle more difficult material wasn't made lightly. They knew it would test them in new ways, but they were ready. At their next meeting, the air was filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Each member sat with a copy of the novel, its pages filled with words they had yet to encounter. As they began reading, the challenges quickly surfaced. Sarah stumbled over unfamiliar phrases. David struggled with the complex sentence structures, and Maria found herself lost in the nuances of the story's tone. But instead of letting these difficulties discourage them, they approached them with the same determination that had carried them this far. Together, they began to develop new strategies for learning. Instead of simply reading the text aloud and hoping for the best, they paused frequently to dissect the meaning of difficult passages. They would break down sentences, looking at each word individually, and then piece them back together to understand the full context. This collaborative approach transformed the way they engaged with the material. It was no longer just about reading the words on the page. It became an exercise in critical thinking, a chance to dig deeper into the emotions and ideas behind the text. One evening, as they were working through a particularly challenging chapter, Sarah had a sudden realization. The novel they were reading was about more than just its plot. It was about the human experience, about the complexities of life, love, and loss. She realized that learning a language wasn't just about memorizing words and grammar rules. It was about connecting with people, understanding the emotions behind the words, and using language as a tool to express one's deepest thoughts and feelings. This epiphany reignited Sarah's passion for learning English. Up until this point, she had viewed the language as a barrier she needed to overcome in order to succeed in her career. But now she began to see it as something more, a way to connect with the world around her, to understand people and their stories in a deeper way. She shared her thoughts with the group, and as they discussed the idea, they realized that they had all experienced a similar shift in perspective. English was no longer just a means to an end, it had become a bridge, linking them to new ideas, new emotions, and new possibilities. As they continued to work through the novel, each member of the group found personal meaning in the stories they were reading. David, who had always struggled with his accent, connected deeply with one of the characters who was an outsider trying to find his place in the world. Maria, who had been feeling the pressure from her family to settle down, resonated with the protagonist's journey of self-discovery and independence. Ben, who had been questioning his ability to succeed in a new language, found solace in the novel's message of resilience and perseverance. The deeper they went into the book, the more they saw their own lives reflected in its pages. Each chapter revealed new insights, not only about the characters in the story, but about themselves as well. The reading club had become a mirror, showing them their own strengths and weaknesses, their fears and hopes. And as they discussed these revelations, their bond grew stronger. They were no longer just learning a language, they were learning about life, about each other, and about themselves. One evening, as they were nearing the end of the novel, Sarah paused to reflect on how far they had come. She thought back to their first meeting, when they had been too nervous to read aloud, too afraid to make mistakes. Now they were tackling complex literature with confidence, discussing themes that were far beyond the simple grammar exercises they had started with. But more importantly, they had grown as people. They had learned to face their insecurities, to support each other through difficult times, and to embrace the process of learning, mistakes and all. As the final chapters of the novel approached, the group felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a sense of sadness. They knew that finishing the book would mark the end of a chapter in their journey, but it wouldn't be the end of their growth. The lessons they had learned through the story about resilience, about connection, about finding meaning in the face of challenges would stay with them long after they closed the book. That evening, as they finished the novel, there was a quiet sense of triumph in the room. Each member of the group had faced their own personal struggles throughout the journey, but they had come through it stronger and more confident. The novel had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, both in terms of their language skills and their personal growth. As they sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey they had just completed, Sarah spoke. She thanked the group for their support, for pushing each other to grow, and for making the reading club more than just a place to learn English. It had become a place of friendship, of mutual understanding, and of shared growth. The group nodded in agreement, each of them feeling the same sense of gratitude for what they had built together. With the novel behind them, they looked ahead to the next phase of their journey. They knew that there would be more challenges to face, both in their language learning and in their personal lives, but now they felt ready to face them. The reading club had given them more than just a new language. It had given them the tools to navigate life's complexities with resilience, empathy, and confidence. As they prepared to leave that evening, there was a sense of quiet optimism in the air. They didn't know what the future would hold, but they knew that they would face it together with the same determination and support that had carried them this far. And with that, the next chapter of their journey began. As the reading club approached the final chapters of the novel they had been working on for weeks, there was an unspoken sense of anticipation among the group. This book had been more challenging than any they had read before, both in terms of its language and its themes, and it had pushed each of them in new ways. The discussions they had shared about the novel had revealed much about their personal struggles, and they had grown closer as a result. But now, as they neared the end of their journey with this book, they were faced with a critical decision. What would happen to the club after the book was finished? During one of their final sessions, Sarah sat quietly contemplating this very question. The reading club had become more than just a place to improve their English. It had become a place where they could be vulnerable, where they could laugh at their mistakes, and where they could find support in one another. But now, with the end of the novel in sight, Sarah worried that the group might drift apart once their shared goal was completed. As the others settled in and opened their books, David was the first to speak. His usual light-hearted tone was absent, replaced by a more serious expression. So he began, "We're almost at the end. What happens next? Do we find another book, or ... His voice trailed off, leaving the question hanging in the air. Maria, who had been unusually quiet that evening, looked up from her book. "I've been thinking about that, too," she admitted. "This club has meant a lot to me, more than I expected. But with work and family pressures, I'm not sure I'll be able to keep up the commitment." Her words echoed the fears that Sarah had been wrestling with for days. Would the demands of life pull them apart after all they had built together? Ben, always thoughtful and measured, spoke next. "It's been hard for me too," he confessed. "Learning English is important, but it's not just about that anymore. This group has been my support system, especially after that job rejection. I don't want it to end." His voice was calm, but there was a hint of vulnerability beneath it, a rare glimpse into the emotions he often kept hidden. Sarah felt her heart ache at the thought of the club ending. She had come so far, not just in her English, but in her confidence and her ability to open up to others. The club had become a lifeline for her, a place where she could be herself without fear of judgment. She didn't want to lose that. Taking a deep breath, she spoke, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I think we should continue," Sarah said, her words surprising even herself. "Not just because of the language, but because of everything we've built here. We've supported each other through so much, and I don't think we're done growing yet. There's more we can do together." Her eyes moved from one friend to the next, searching for a sign that they felt the same way. There was a moment of silence as the group processed her words. Then, one by one, they began to nod in agreement. David, who had been the most hesitant about his future with the club, was the first to speak up. "You're right," he said with a small smile. "I've struggled a lot with my accent and feeling like I don't belong, but this club has helped me see that it's okay to make mistakes, that I'm still learning. I don't want to give that up." Maria, who had been balancing the pressures of family expectations and her desire to grow as an individual, looked relieved. "I think I need this club more than I realized," she admitted. "It's helped me stand up for myself, to tell my family that I'm doing something for me. I don't want to lose that either." Ben, who had been the quietest of the group, spoke last. "I'm in," he said simply. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I wouldn't have made it this far without all of you. If we're going to keep growing, we need to keep going." With the decision made, the group felt a renewed sense of purpose. They weren't just reading together to learn English anymore. They were reading to support each other, to grow as individuals, and to face the challenges of life together. The end of the novel wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where they could continue to challenge themselves, not just with language, but with the personal growth they had all experienced. The next week, as they gathered for their final session with the novel, there was a sense of celebration in the air. They had come so far since their first awkward meeting, where each of them had been too afraid to speak up for fear of making a mistake. Now they read aloud with confidence, discussing the deeper themes of the book with ease and fluency. Their English skills had improved dramatically, but more importantly, they had grown as people. As they finished the final chapter, there was a brief moment of silence. The book had been a challenge, but they had faced it together, and now they had reached the end. Sarah looked around at her friends, feeling a deep sense of pride for everything they had accomplished. It wasn't just about finishing the book, it was about everything they had learned along the way. Breaking the silence, Sarah spoke. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her voice filled with emotion. "This club has meant more to me than I can put into words. I've learned so much, not just about English, but about myself, and I couldn't have done it without all of you." Her words were met with nods and smiles from the group. David, always quick with a joke, added, "And here I thought we were just here to learn English. Turns out we're all getting free therapy too." The room erupted in laughter, a fitting end to their journey with the novel. But as the laughter died down, there was a sense of something deeper in the room, a sense of connection, of shared growth, of friendship. As they packed up their things and prepared to leave, Sarah felt a sense of optimism for the future. The club wasn't ending, it was evolving. They would continue to meet, to read, and to support each other, no matter what challenges came their way. And with that, they closed the chapter on one part of their journey, ready to begin the next together.